Jeffrey Simmons, Jalen Carter, and the Eagles, the NFL supplemental draft, the Phillies, and the NBA draft. Yes, everyone, I have 2 drafts to report on today on the 4th episode of the 2nd season of Friday Round Leagues with Jon Gordon. I'm Jon Gordon, and in this show, every single Friday, I'll be here to tell you about the most recent news that's happening around the major leagues. Welcome in, and let's get started. Alrighty, let's start off with Jeffrey Simmons. If you have heard about him, if you haven't, here's a little backstory on him. Jeffrey Simmons has been a standout defensive tackle for the Tennessee Titans for so many years. Well, the Titans have now deemed him one of the best players at his position in NFL history. That's crazy to say, but it's pay-wise. Because the Titans have given Jeffrey Simmons a 3-year, $35.5 million extension with $100 million guaranteed, making him the highest paid D tackle in NFL history. I've watched so much of Jeffrey Simmons, and, this is very much deserved. But how badly is this going to shake up the D tackle market? And, it's already happening. It is already happening. And it's affecting the Eagles. It is affecting the Eagles and Jalen Carter. Because the Eagles and Jalen Carter have had, already disputes on contract extension. And this is just going to make it so much worse and have so much pressure on the Eagles. Because the market of Jalen Carter is going to go way up. It's going to go way up. And, if there isn't a signing, this may be the last few years of Jalen Carter. He was a great player. He is a great player for the Eagles. He's been a standout defensive tackle right in the middle. Even though he was suspended a few games last year and, he's had some issues, he's still been an incredible player. Hopefully the Eagles can sign him back to, an extension and keep him. But it's going to be a lot more now that Jeffrey Simmons got paid. Let's flip. And then something I talked about while, giving my little explanation of what's going to be on the show, I talked about the NFL supplemental draft. Some of you might not know what that is. You may have never heard about it. This occurred one time in 2019 where the Cardinals were able to get Jalen Thompson for a 5th-round pick. That did turn out to be pretty good because Jalen Thompson was really good. But the supplemental draft is where players that switch their decision to wanting to go to the NFL after the real NFL draft, they get to be entered into this supplemental draft where teams can bid their real draft picks to try and get them. Well, why am I saying this? You may think, it's just like another thing. But this pertains to a little bit of news from a little while ago that I may have not talked about. But, if you've seen it, it's going to be a lot. But Brandon Sorsby, he gambled on almost every single game for his team in college and, paid the reparations for it. But he's decided he wants to go to the NFL. And he's been entered into the supplemental draft. And reports are saying that he might go for a 2nd-round pick. As someone who, has seen him, gambling, watched the reports of that. I don't know if a 2nd-round pick would be, a lot, or, a thing that would happen. But, I'm not an NFL reporter. I'm not an NFL analyst. I'm just a amateur analyst. So we'll have to see. I'll have reports on that. But they say he's going for 2nd-round pick. And that's all I have on the NFL. And let's switch to the MLB. And this is going to be on the Phillies, like, I've been saying for a little while. I've been giving my updates on the record of the Phillies. And now it's up to 29-14. Oh my God, it is a masterclass, here in Philly for Don Mattingly and the Philadelphia Phillies. They just keep getting better and better, and hopefully we can keep Don Mattingly for a little while for contract extension and keep him in Philly. We really never know, but this season right now that we're having, it's extraordinary. We were out The Phillies were out completely, in April when we let go of Rob Thompson. We were tied for last place in the NL East. But since Don Mattingly started, we are second and have never looked back. I really hope we continue with this. As a Phillies fan, I'd love to see this continue and, continue for the next few years. We'll have to see who our, new GM is, because Don Mattingly is the interim GM. But hopefully we can just continue on this streak and, maybe make it to the playoffs. I would love to see the Philadelphia Phillies in the playoffs. And, that's all I have on the MLB and the Phillies. And let's switch off to the NBA and the NBA draft. That'll be occurring in a week. So I'm just going to give my, predictions on from the first pick to the fifth pick, like I did for the NBA draft. And I will be having, a special NBA draft, cast just to, make my predictions to see if any of my predictions were right, like I did with the NFL draft. But let's get into these predictions. So for the first prediction, for the number one overall pick is the Wizards. It's kind of a lock that it's going to be A.J. Dibbanza. A.J. Dibbanza from BYU, a pretty great player. I've watched a lot of film of his. He has great fluidity, and, he's just an all-around great scorer. And, hopefully he can bring some, something to the Washington team, because last year there was really nothing. But them bringing in Anthony Davis and Trae Young, and now having A.J. Dibbanza, having that big three, I think is going to make a little bit, make this next season a little bit less, unbearable for Washington fans. But then the second pick is the Utah Jazz. And they have, and I say that they select Darren Peterson out of Kentucky. This is still a good pick. Darren Peterson, he could have gone, 2 or 3, switched off with 2 or 3. But, he's still an amazing player. I've watched some film from him in Kentucky. He, leads the floor, and he's definitely going to be able to help the Utah Jazz, whose, struggles took them to even tanking. Hopefully Darren Peterson can, bring something, so then, the team isn't having to resort to tanking. But then the third overall pick is the Grizzlies pick. And this is a Boozer pick. Because Cameron Boozer is, I say Cameron Boozer is going number 3 to the Grizzlies. Him and his brother on Duke had a very sad ending with their March Madness, bracket timing. And, it was extremely sad to see at the end of the game, the turnover and the last second 3-point shot that, kicked him out was extremely sad to see. But, Cameron Boozer, even though past that, he was still an amazing player over the season. And, he's deserving of going number 3, or at least in the top 5. And, I predict he goes number 3 to the Grizzlies. And then number 4 is Caleb Wilson out of North Carolina. That's the Bulls pick. Caleb Wilson had a, pretty bad injury that kept him out of the March Madness tournament. But past that, he's still a great player. He's still an amazing player. He's extremely tall, and, he's good. He's very good at defense, good at transitions. And hopefully he can, fit right into his Chicago and maybe, just maybe, bring them a championship since the last time that was brought to them from Michael Jordan. That's what all the teams are hoping for with their draft picks. And then pick number 5, I say is going to be a trade. I know, it's my first time announcing a trade for the NBA draft and all around. I didn't announce a trade for my predictions for the NFL draft, but this is going to be a trade. It is the Clippers trading the Pacers trading the number 5 overall pick to the Clippers. And I say with the number 5 overall pick, the Clippers take Keaton Wagler. I haven't heard much on Keaton Wagler. I haven't seen much film, but to be put in the top 5 of my prediction must mean that he's pretty good. I've really haven't seen much on him, but hopefully, he fits right in with that Clippers team that's kind of aging, but trying to bring up anew. And that's all I have. Next week, when the draft is, it's June 23rd and June 24th. I will be, sharing the first 5 picks. I will be having my special to let you all know if I was right or wrong. But that's all I have. Thank you all for watching, and please subscribe.